Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at section 1.5a, if-then statements. So the first definition we have for today is a conditional statement. Okay, conditional statement. And a conditional statement is defined as a statement of the form if P then Q. Okay, if P then Q. So it's like an if-then statement. All right, so if something, then something else. Okay, so the way we write if-then statements in symbol form, because you know we love a symbol, is P implies Q. Okay, so P implies Q. Okay, so it reads P implies Q. All right, so in this, P is called your hypothesis. And Q is your conclusion. Now, depending on the book or who you're talking to, P can also be called the antecedent, and Q can be called the consequence. Consequent. Okay? All right. So, example 1. If your teacher tells you that if you participate in class, then you will get extra points. So the antecedent here, okay, and if you're like, I can't remember which one's which, antecedent comes first is the if part, consequent is the second part. So the part after if is your antecedent, not the if itself, but the part after. So you participate in class. Okay, so the consequence would be you will get extra points. Okay, now equivalent forms, other ways to write conditional statements. Okay, so the way you word P implies Q. So you could do, using this sentence right here, we can rephrase it using different ways. So we have the way that it was originally written. So if you participate in class, then you will get extra points. Okay, so that's like the OG, the original way to write that. So another way that you can write it that means exactly the same thing is you can write your consequent first, then comma, if the first part. So you could say, you will get extra points if you participate in class. All right, another one. P if only Q. So you will and sometimes you have to change a little bit of the wording. You will participate in class if only you get extra points. Okay. All right. P implies Q. So participation in class implies you will get extra points. Okay. Another one. When you participate in class, then you will get extra points. Okay. Now this one, participating in class is a sufficient condition for getting extra points. All right. So participating in class is a sufficient condition for getting extra points. All right. Now this one says Q is necessary condition for P. So extra points is a necessary, helps if you spell right, necessary condition for participating in class. Okay, and that wouldn't be very hard if they gave you the form and you knew the antecedent and the consequent, then you can very easily create those forms. Okay. Now, this is very, very, very important. This next piece. When is a conditional statement true? Okay, so this is important for our truth tables. How do we know when a conditional statement is true? All right. P implies Q is false when P is true and Q is false. Okay, so P implies Q, so it's false. When P is true, Q is false. It is true for all other cases. So the only time it's false is when P is true and Q is false. All right, so let's make a truth table. Okay, so we have our P, our Q, and P implies Q. All right, so remember our options. Both on, one off and on, off and off. Okay, so the only time it's false, the only time it's off is when the first one's true and the second one's false. Everybody else is true. Okay, now next, if it rains, then they cancel school. Okay, so the given conditional, if it rains, then they cancel school. So P is it rains, then, so the Q is they cancel school. Okay, so when we are looking at inverse, when they ask you for the inverse, you're just going to negate the statement. Okay, so you put not, not the P and the Q in the symbol form. So, because it's not for all or some, then you can write, if it doesn't rain, then they won't cancel school. Okay. All right. Next, converse. Converse means to switch the order. So that just means that Q implies P. So you're just switching them. So you go, if they cancel school, then it rains. Okay? Contrapositive is like the marriage of the two. So you're going to switch and negate. Contrapositive is doing both. Okay? So it's not on the Q and not on the P. Okay? So inverse is just negate. Converse is just switch. Contrapositive is both. So you need to remember what these three words mean. Okay? So you're going to say, if they don't cancel school, then it won't rain. Okay? Okay, so now let's look at this table. And just like I always do, I think when I made the tables, I didn't account for the fact that I was going to have to put the letters in the top. So they would have been big enough had I not had to do that. Okay. All right, so here we go. So remember our P and Q. 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. You should be really good at that now. Okay, remember for the basic conditional, the only one that's 0 is when the first one is 1 and the second one is 0. So we have that right there. Okay, now this one says not P, so we need to change all of our P's. This one says not Q, so we change all of our Q's. So that's 0, 1, 0, 1. Now, here, remember in a conditional statement, the only one that's false is when P is on. No, this will be when Q is on and P is false. So, false when not Q is true, not P is false. So, Q is true, P is false. So, it's this one. So, these will be on. So, if you look at the law of contrapositives, what we were trying to prove here is to show that the conditional and the contrapositive will have the same value. So they are logically, what do we call that when they're the same? Logically equivalent. So we would say P implies Q is logically equivalent to not Q implies not P. Okay? All right. All right. Now we need to look at this one. Now we're going to do this. So let's do both on. Well, first I have to make my box. Okay. All right. So 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. Okay. Remember the only one that's off is this one. So on, on, on. Okay. Now, not P. Okay. So not P would be 0, 0, 1, 1. Remember for or, 1 or both on. Okay? So here we're looking at these two things. As long as something is on, it works. And what do you notice here? The or statement is equal to the conditional. So we proved that. Okay? Now, let's write this negation of a conditional statement. All right? The negation of a conditional statement. So if we're looking here and we see that it's not P or Q, how would we negate this? So it would be P and not Q. Okay? So the negation of the statement is P and not Q. Okay, this is really important. Okay, so if they ask you to negate an if-then statement, you leave the first piece alone, make it an and statement, and make the consequent negated. Okay, so what you need to remember here, the negation is an and statement, not another conditional. So it stops being an if-then statement. Don't use if and then when writing the negation. All right. So example 2. Here we go. We're going to write this negation. So if Bob is from Jamaica, then he is from the Caribbean, or Caribbean, however way you want to pronounce that. So remember what we do. We drop the if and then. We keep the P the same. Bob is from Jamaica, and comes an and. He is not from the Caribbean. Okay, now remember, the original statement here is a true statement. When we negate something, it changes the truth value. And that means that this statement is now false. Okay, so if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks. Have a good day.